Continuing Romulus from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Some say Roma, daughter of the Trojan lady above mentioned, was married to Latinus, Telemachus' son, and became mother to Romulus. Others said Amelia, daughter of Aeneas, and Lavinia had him by the entity Mars, and others give you mere fables of his origin. Saying somebody's born of a god, that's or something that's considered to be a god is but the other things, they're the fables. Well, the Bible has 2 Peter. Where is that? For to Tarchetius, they say, king of Alba, who was a most wicked and cruel man, there appeared in his own house a strange vision, a male figure that rose out of a hearth and stayed there for many days. There was an oracle of Tethys in Tuscany, which Tarchetius consulted, and received an answer that a virgin should give herself to that apparition, and that a son should be born of her, highly renowned, eminent for valor, good fortune, and strength of body. Tarchetius told the prophecy to one of his own daughters, and commanded her to do this thing, which she, avoiding as an indignity, sent her handmaid. Tarchetius, hearing this, in great anger imprisoned them both, proposing to put them to death, but being deterred from murder by the female entity Vesta in a dream, enjoined them for their punishment the working of a web of cloth in their chains, as they were, which, when they finished, they should be suffered to marry, but whatever they worked by day, Tarchetius commanded others to unravel in the night. In the meantime, the waiting woman was delivered of 2 boys, whom Tarchetius gave into the hands of one Teratius, with command to destroy them. He, however, carried and laid them by the river side, where a wolf came and continued to suckle them, while birds of various sorts brought little morsels of food, which they put into their mouths, till a cowherd, spying them, was first strangely surprised, but, venturing to draw nearer, took the children up in his arms. Thus they were saved, and when they grew up, set upon Tarchetius, and overcame him. This one Promathian says, who compiled a history of Italy. But the story, which is most believed, and has the greatest number of vouchers, was first published, its chief particulars amongst the Greeks, by Diocles of Peparethus, whom Fabius Pictor also follows in most points. Here again there are variations, but in general outline it runs thus. The kings of Alba reigned in lineal descent from Aeneas, and the succession devolved at length upon 2 brothers, Numitor and Amelius. Amelius proposed to divide things into 2 equal shares, and set as equivalent to the kingdom the treasure and gold that were brought from Troy. Numitor chose the kingdom, but Amelius, having the money and being able to do more with that than Numitor, took his kingdom from him with great ease, and fearing lest his daughter might have children, made her a vestal, bound in that condition forever, to live a single and maiden life. This lady some call Ilia, others Rhea, and others Sylvia. However, not long after, she was contrary to the established laws of the Vestals, discovered to be with child, and should have suffered the most cruel punishment, had not Antho, the king's daughter, mediated with her father for her. Nevertheless, she was confined, and debarred all company, that she might not be delivered without the king's knowledge. In time she brought forth 2 boys of more than human size and beauty, whom Amulius, becoming yet more alarmed, commanded a servant to take and cast away. This man some call Faustulus, others say Faustulus was the man who brought them up. He put the children, however, in a small trough, and went towards the river, with a design to cast them in, but seeing the waters much swollen and coming violently down, was afraid to go nearer, and dropping the children near the bank, went away. The river overflowing, the flood at last bore up the trough, and gently wafting it, landed them on a smooth piece of ground, which they now called Germanus, formerly Germanus, perhaps from Germani, which signifies brothers. Near this place grew a wild fig, which they call Romulus, either from Romulus, as it is vulgarly thought, or from ruminating, because cattle did usually, in the heat of day, seek cover under it, and there chew the cud, are better from the suckling of these children there. For the ancients called the dug or teat of any creature Ruma, and there is a tutelar female entity of the rearing of children, whom they so call Romulia, in sacrificing to whom they use no wine, but make libations of milk, while the infants lie here. History tells us a she-wolf nursed them, and a woodpecker constantly fed and watched them. These creatures are esteemed holy to the entity Mars. The woodpecker the Latins still especially worship and honor, which things, as much as any, give credit to what the mother of the children said, that their father was the entity Mars, though some say it was a mistake to put upon her by Amulius, who himself had come to her dressed up in armor. Others think that the first rise of this fable came from the children's nurse, through the ambiguity of her name, for the Latins not only called wolves lupa, but also women of loose life, and such and one was the wife of Faustulus, who murdered these children, Acca Laurentia by name. Isn't that a phrase that Aleister Crowley used for certain women? A wolf type? To her, the Romans offer sacrifices, and in the month of April, the priest of Mars makes libations there. It is called the Laurentian feast. They honor also another Laurentia, for the following reason: the keeper of Hercules' temple, having, it seems, little else to do, proposed to what he considered to be his deity a game at dice, laying down that, if he himself won, he would have something valuable of the entity, but if he were beaten, he would spread him a noble table, and procure him a fair lady's company. Upon these terms, throwing first for the entity and then for himself, he found himself beaten, wishing to pay his stakes honorably, and holding himself bound by what he had said. He both provided the entity a good supper, and giving money to Laurentia, then in her beauty, though not publicly known, gave her a feast in the temple, where he had also laid a bed, and after supper locked her in, as if the entity were really to come to her. So, definitely not the view of the person who spoke to Albert Einstein, God doesn't. Was it Albert Einstein that said God doesn't play dice? And somebody else, was it Stephen Hawking, who said, "Don't tell God what to do with his dice"? Or who said what? Anyways, and indeed, it is said, the entity did truly visit her and commanded her in the morning to walk to the marketplace, and whatever man she met first to salute him and make him her friend. She met one named Taurutius, who was a man advanced in years, fairly rich, without children, and always had lived a single life. He received Laurentia, he loved her well, and at his death left her sole heir of all his large and fair possessions, most of which she in her last will and testament bequeathed to the people. It was reported of her being now celebrated and esteemed the mistress of an entity, that she suddenly disappeared near the place where the first Laurentia lay buried. The spot is at this day called Valabrum, because the river frequently overlapping, they went over in ferry boats somewhat hereabouts to the Forum, the Latin word for ferrying becoming velatura. Others derive the name from velum, a sail, because the exhibitors of public shows used to hang the road that leads from the Forum to the Circus Maximus with sails beginning at this spot. Upon these accounts, the second Laurentia is honored at Rome. Meantime, Faustulus, Amalius's swineherd, brought up the children without any man's knowledge, are, as those say who wish to keep closer to probabilities, with the knowledge and secret assistance of Numitor, for it is said they went to school at Gabae, and were well instructed in letters and other accomplishments befitting their birth, and they were called Romulus and Remus, from Ruma the dug, as we had before, because they were found sucking the wolf. The Golden Dawn tarot card deck has a couple kids and a wolf, so that's what they're well, it has a baby and a wolf, but yeah. In their first infancy, the size and beauty of their bodies intimated their natural superiority, and when they grew up, they both proved brave and manly, attempting all enterprises that seemed hazardous, and showing in them a courage altogether undaunted. But Romulus seemed rather to act by counsel and to show the sagacity of a statesman, and in all his dealings with their neighbors, whether relating to feeding of flocks or to hunting, gave the idea of being born rather to rule than to obey. To their comrades and inferiors they were therefore dear, but the king's servants, his bailiffs and overseers, as being in nothing better than themselves, they despised and slighted. There was a smudge there. Nor were the least concerned in their commands and menaces. They used honest pastimes and liberal studies, not esteeming sloth and idleness honest and liberal, but rather such exercises as hunting and running, repelling robbers, taking of thieves, and delivering the wronged and oppressed from injury. For doing such things they became famous, a quarrel occurring betwixt Numitor's and Amalius's cowherds, the latter not enduring the driving away of their cattle by the others, fell upon them and put them to flight, and rescued the greatest part of the prey, at which Numitor, being highly incensed, they little regarded it, but collected and took to their company a number of needy men and runaway slaves, acts which looked like the first stages of rebellion. It so happened that when Romulus was attending a sacrifice, being fond of sacred rites and divination, Numitor's herdsman, meeting with Remus on a journey with few companions, fell upon him, and after some fighting took him prisoner, carrying him before Numitor, and there accused him. Numitor would not punish him himself, fearing his brother's anger, but went to Amulius and desired justice, as he was Amulius's brother and was affronted by Amulius's servants. The men of Alba likewise resenting the thing, and thinking he had been dishonorably used, Amulius was induced to deliver Remus up into Numitor's hands, to use him as he thought fit. He therefore took and carried him home, and being struck with admiration of the youth's person, in stature and strength of body exceeding all men, and perceiving in his very countenance the courage and force of his mind, which stood unsubdued and unmoved by his present circumstances, and hearing further that all the enterprises and actions of his life were unanswerable to what he saw of him, but chiefly it seemed a divine influence aiding and directing the first steps that were to lead to great results. Out of the mere thought of his mind, and casually as it were, he put his hand upon the fact, and in general terms, and with a kind aspect, to inspire him with confidence and hope, asked him who he was, and whence he was derived. He, taking heart, spoke thus: I will hide nothing from you, for you seem to be of a more princely temper than Amulius, in that you give a hearing and examine before you punish, while he condemns before the cause is heard. Formerly then we, for we are twins, thought ourselves the sons of Faustulus and Laurentia, and Laurentia, the king's servants. But since we have been accused and aspersed with calumnies, and brought in peril of our lives here before you, we hear great things of ourselves, the truth of which my present danger is likely to bring to the test. Our birth is said to have been secret, our fostering and nurture in our infancy still more strange by birds and beasts, to whom we were cast out. We were fed by the milk of a wolf and the morsels of a woodpecker, as we lay in a little trough by the side of the river. The trough is still in being, and is preserved with brass plates round it, and an inscription in letters almost effaced, which may prove hereafter unveiling tokens to our parents when we are dead and gone. Numitor, upon these words, and computing the dates by the young man's looks, slighted not the hope that flattered him, but considered how to come at his daughter privately, for she was kept under restraint, to talk with her concerning these matters. Faustulus, hearing, Remus was taken and delivered up, called on Romulus to assist in his rescue, informing him then plainly of the particulars of his birth, not but he had before given hints of it, and told as much as an attentive man might make no small conclusions from. He himself, full of concern and fear of not coming in time, took the trough and ran instantly to Numitor, but giving a suspicion to some of the king's sentries at his gate, and being gazed upon by them and perplexed with their questions, he let it be seen that he was hiding the trough under his cloak. By chance there was one among them who was at the exposing of the children, and was employed in the office. He, seeing the trough, and knowing it by its make and inscription, guessed at the business, and without further delay, telling the king of it, he brought in the man to be examined. Faustulus, hard beset, did not show himself altogether proof against terror, nor yet was he wholly forced out of all. Confessed indeed the children were alive, but lived, he said, as shepherds a great way from Alba. He himself was going to carry the trough to Ilia, who had often greatly desired to see and handle it, for a confirmation of her hopes of her children, as men generally do who are troubled in mind and act either in fear or passion. It so fell out Amulius now did, for he sent in haste as a messenger a man otherwise honest and friendly to Numitor, with commands to learn from Numitor whether any tidings were come to him of the children being alive, he coming and seeing how little Remus wanted of being received into the arms and embraces of Numitor. Both gave him sure confidence in his hope and advised them with all expedition to proceed to action, himself to joining and assisting them, and indeed, had they wished it, the time would not have let them demur, for Romulus was now come very near, and many of the citizens, out of fear and hatred of Amulius, were running out to join him. Beside, he brought great forces with him, divided into companies, each of 100 men, every captain carrying a small bundle of grass and shrubs tied to a pole. The Latins call such bundles manipulae, and from hence it is that in their armies they still call their captains manipulaires. Remus rousing the citizens within to revolt, and Romulus making attacks from without. The tyrant, not knowing either what to do or what expedient to think of for his security, in this perplexity and confusion was taken to be put to death. This narrative, for the most part, given by Fabius and Diocles of Peperetus, who seems to be the earliest historians of the foundation of Rome, is suspected by some because of its dramatic and fictitious appearance, but it would not wholly be disbelieved if men would remember what a poet Fortune sometimes shows herself, and consider that the Roman power would hardly have reached so high a pitch without a divinely ordered origin, attended with great and extraordinary circumstances. And the bundles of the army and that sort of thing also relate to the term fascism, because certainly the unity and the sameness that you find in in army and police and stuff is at least part fascist. So we're not judging fascism for that aspect, right? It doesn't mean that you're totally, left wing. It's, but fascism could be, right? You generally don't want the military to rule, because then that's what happens. Amulius now being dead, and matters quietly disposed, the two brothers would neither dwell in Alba without governing there, nor take the government into their own hands during the life of their grandfather. Having therefore delivered the dominion up into his hands, and paid their mother befitting honor, they resolved to live by themselves, and build a city in the same place where they were in their infancy brought up. This seems the most honorable reason for their departure, though perhaps it was necessary, having such a body of slaves and fugitives collected about them, either to come to nothing by dispersing them, or if not so, then to live with them elsewhere, for that the inhabitants of Alba did not think fugitives worthy of being received and incorporated as citizens among them, plainly appears from the matter of the women, an attempt made not wantonly, but of necessity, because they cannot get wives by goodwill, for they certainly paid unusual respect and honor to them whom they thus forcibly seized. Not long after the first foundation of the city, they opened a sanctuary of refuge for all fugitives, which they called the Temple of the Entity Estellatus, where they received and protected all, delivering none back, neither the servant to his master, the debtor to his creditor, nor the murderer into the hands of the magistrate. Personally see that part going too far. Saying it was a privileged place, and they could somewhat maintain it by an order of the Holy Oracle, inasmuch that the city grew presently very populous, for, they say, it consisted at first of no more than 1,000 houses, but of that hereafter. Now, a sanctuary where violence is kept out, but of course, if such a criminal causes problems in the precincts, they're not going to wait. Their minds being full bent upon building, there arose presently a difference about the place. Romulus chose what was called Roma Quadrata, or the square Rome, and would have the city there. Remus laid out a piece of ground on the Aventine Mount, well fortified by nature, which was from him called Romanium, but now Regnarium, concluding at last to decide the contest by a divination from a flight of birds, and placing themselves apart at some distance, Remus, they say, saw 6 vultures, and Romulus double that number. Others say Remus did truly see his number, and that Romulus feigned his, but when Remus came to him, that then he did indeed see 12. Hence it is that the Romans, in their divinations from birds, chiefly regard the vulture. Through Herodorus, Ponticus relates that Hercules was always very joyful when a vulture appeared to him upon any action, for it is a creature the least hurtful of any, pernicious neither to corn, fruit tree, nor cattle. It preys only upon carrion, and never kills or hurts any living thing. And as for birds, it touches them not, though they are dead, as being of its own species, whereas eagles, owls, and hawks mangle and kill their own fellow creatures. Yet, as Aeschylus says, what bird is clean that preys on fellow bird? And wasn't the ancient Egyptians the entity of truth, or truth personified in a vulture? So the vulture, at least in some opinion, was likewise most auspicious. Besides, all other birds are, so to say, never out of our eyes. They let themselves be seen of us continually. But a vulture is a very rare sight, and you can seldom meet with a man that has seen their young. Their rarity and infrequency has raised a strange opinion in some, that they come to us from some other world, as soothsayers ascribe of a divine origination to all things not produced either of nature or of themselves. When Remus knew the cheat, he was much displeased, as Romulus was casting up a ditch where he designed the foundation of the city wall, he turned up some pieces of the work to ridicule, and obstructed others at last, and he was in contempt leaping over it. And some say Romulus himself struck him, others Celer. One of his companions he fell, and in the scuffle Faustulus also was slain, and Plistinus, who, being Faustulus's brother, story tells us, helped to bring up Romulus. Celer, upon this, fled instantly into Tuscany, and from him the Romans call all men that are swift of feet Celeres, and because Quintus Metellus, at his father's funeral in a few days' time, gave the people a show of gladiators, admiring his expedition in getting it ready, they gave him the name of Celer. Romulus, having buried his brother Remus, together with his 2 foster fathers, on the Mount Romania, set to building his city, and sent for men out of Tuscany, who directed him by sacred usages and written rules in all the ceremonies to be observed, as in a religious rite. First they dug a round trench about that which is now the comitium, or court of assembly, and into it solemnly threw the first fruits of all things, either good by custom or necessary by nature. Lastly, every man taking a small piece of earth of the country from whence he came, they all threw in promiscuously together. This trench they call, as they do the heavens, mundus, making which their centre, they describe the city in a circle round it. And then the founder fitted to a plough a brazen ploughshare, and yoking together a bull and a cow, drove himself a deep line or furrow round the bounds, while the business of those that followed after was to see that whatever earth was thrown up should be turned all inwards towards the city, and not to let any clod lie outside. With this line they described the wall, and called it by a contraction pomoerium, that is, post murum, after or beside the wall. And where they designed to make a gate, where they took out the share, carried the plough over, and left a space, for which reason they consider the whole wall as holy, except where the gates are. For had they adjudged them also sacred, they could not, without offence to religion, have given free ingress and egress for the necessaries of human life, some of which are in themselves unclean. Well, a couple of them, right? Not as many as some people think, I would think. As for the day they began to build the city, it is universally agreed to have been the 21st of April, and that day the Romans annually keep holy, calling it their country's birthday. At first, they say, they sacrifice no living creature on this day, thinking it fit to preserve the feast of their country's birthday pure and without stain of blood. Yet before ever the city was built, there was a feast of herdsmen and shepherds kept to this day, which went by the name of Palelia. The Roman and Greek months have now little or no agreement. They say, however, the day on which Romulus began to build was quite certainly the 30th of the month, at which time there was an eclipse of the sun, which they conceived to be that seen by Antimachus, the Teian poet, in the 3rd year of the 6th Olympiad, in the times of Varro the philosopher. A man deeply read in Roman history lived one Terentius, his familiar acquaintance